Hello there. Hey, I'm Jim Young with OPAF again. I had a question for Robin Burton. She said, "Tell us a little bit about adaptive guitar playing, and maybe even talk about my amputation and stuff." So I will do it again. I'm Jim Young. I'm a former OPAF board member. I'm a prosthetist. I have my own prosthetic company in Georgia, and I've been an amputee for 30 years. I had my accident back in 1988 and the very beginning of 1991. Um, I had my leg amputated after 28 operations and basically 3 years in the hospital. I was tired of being my doctor's science experiment. So I decided to move on with it. I did very well with crutches. I did very well in a wheelchair. Basically, I could run on crutches. I had a 3-month-old baby when they cut my leg off, and I lived in a garage apartment that had 18 steps. So, you figure it out. You wear a diaper bag on your back like a backpack. You learn to stick the baby in your shirt and tighten your belt and take off on up the steps. And, he's got a few scars, but yeah, he seems to have made it out all right. He actually works with me now. So I was very good at being disabled prior to having my leg amputated. I've been down for 3 years. I coached baseball from a wheelchair, uh, scouts. I did all that kind of stuff prior to having my leg amputated when I was already basically in a wheelchair on crutches all the time. Once they amputated my leg, it actually slowed me down to learn how to use a prosthesis, and it was super frustrating. I was like, I get along better with crutches and on a wheelchair, but I was doing exceptionally well in a wheelchair and on crutches. I played wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, track and field, and all that kind of stuff. So it was an adjustment to learn how to use a prosthesis. So enough about me. We're going to talk about guitars. So obviously, there's lots of them on the wall. Like most what I call guitar widows. They're like, "What do you need another guitar for?" Well, I don't know. What need at some point? What's the difference? You know. Well, here's the difference. They're like children. They're all different. They make different sounds. They're made differently. They act differently. So, for example, if you're going to start to play the guitar, there's some considerations you want to make. Well, budget, how much can I afford, and how much am I willing to pay, regardless of how much I can afford. Um, Once you figure out those parameters, then you kind of go hone in, and you should go somewhere where you can physically play a lot of them. A judgment-free zone. I know some of the gyms use that slogan. It's judgment-free zone. But you should go to a guitar store and grab a few. Now, there's a lot of people who they're gonna look for the right name at the top of the guitar. Like, this happens to be a Martin, and this is a high quality guitar, and it comes with a price tag that indicates it's a high quality guitar. Uh, but I didn't go to the store hunting for this guitar. I played a bunch of guitars, and I fell in love with this guitar. This one happens to be tuned in a tuning that I'm trying to mess around with right now. It's not open E, but So this is a finger picking style. It's basically chords but picked out, and it's played in an open modal tuning. And I love those types of sounds. But the thing that attracted me to this guitar is the thickness of the neck, the size of the body. I like big old guitars. I like the jumbos. I like the thick ones. This one is a very, very nice guitar. Of course, I say that about all of them. I say I hate this kid. All my children, all my guitars are like my children. I don't have a guitar that I don't love. If I don't love it, I wouldn't buy it. So this is really a big jumbo guitar. Look how big this thing is. It's got a real fat body, shaped like a woman. It's got the cutout where I can get my hand up here because I have limited range of motion. I tend to favor an acoustic guitar with a cutout. There are some purist snobs that, they want a full dreadnought and they don't want a slope shoulder and all that. Like, whatever, man. You know what? Find the guitar that you love and go for it. This one has a really thick neck. It's much thicker than the Martin. This Toby Keith signature model, it's got some really cool wood, and I can't lie, the gorgeousness of this guitar was a consideration when I bought it. I mean, you see those tiger stripings, so the aesthetics, you might want a pretty girl. So I like this one, but the neck, it's kind of fat. It's a little harder to get around, but the sound of this guitar is incredible. So sound is a kind of important thing when you're doing something that's primarily because of sound. That might be a little loud. And this, if you're ever going to play through an electronic sound system, that's another consideration for your guitar. This one has an onboard equalizer and a pickup system, so I can either turn it off or I can turn it on. So, depending on what you're looking for, you may or may not want to have a guitar that has onboard electronics, or maybe you're petite and this is just weird and hard to hold. I have another guitar that I pulled out just for this quick video, if I can get it without falling off my stool. This is a relatively inexpensive guitar. This is actually an American-made guitar. It's called a Tacoma. It's really has a thin neck. Look how thin that baby is. And, this is one of the things that attracted me to this guitar is, a lot of players will say, hey, man, it's a fast neck versus a slow neck. A fast neck, and it's one that's easy to get up and down. And this one is super easy to get up and down because it's so thin. It has kind of a unique sound. The sound hole is on the top. That's a bit unusual. There's other guitars out there that do it, but it's the only weird sound hole guitar that I have. But it's super light. It's not quite as thick through here as my other guitars. So it doesn't have that big booming voice. But sometimes you don't want that. It depends on where you're playing, who you're playing to, the style of music you play. Now I happen to be a guy that plays a lot of ballads. I'm a big softy and a sappy, and I can sing ballads all day. It would never bother me at all. Other people want something that has a lot of hard charging rock and roll grit to it, and that's a consideration when you buy the guitar. This also has another weird feature. A lot of times there are pins down here to hold the strings in. This has slots, And man, it is a pain in the butt whenever you're changing string. Those slots are not a great idea. There's a reason that most people use pins instead of slots. These slots are the bane of my existence. I hate changing strings on this guitar, which happens to bring us to the string talk. So I talked in our last video about string gauge. When you first start out, it can be difficult, hard on your fingers, hard to press down. So these, if you look right here, there's a number 12. Those are 12 gauge strings. They're pretty thick, you know. And here's the weird thing. They're called light. They call those light gauge strings. To me, those are like cables, man. It's really difficult to push that down. And for a new guitar player, their hands aren't strong yet. Man, it's tough. So the easiest thing, drop it down one notch. This is an 11. These happen to be my favorite types of strings. These Roto Sound Jumbo Kings. They're made in the UK, but I like them because the way they sound, not where they're made. And this is the type of guitar string that I use. I used a lot initially. As my hands got stronger, I went to some thicker strings. But on my older guitars or my guitars that aren't as solidly built, I'm probably going to select a lighter string gauge because it puts less stress on the neck. It's also easier to play. But when you change those string gauges, you might affect the intonation of your guitar. You may also affect the sound. Thicker or fatter strings, the 12s, 13s, and crazy people play 15s. When you get up to that thick of a string, you really get a warm, booming sound out of it. And as the string gauge gets lighter, it gets a brighter sound. Some people say more of a tinny sound. I think, again, it's part string, it's part the guitar, and then you get into the super snobbery of guitar life, which then you start talking about what's the bone, do you have a bone saddle, a nut, or whatever, and that's basically guitar anatomy. What's things made out of, what types of woods that you use, what types of shapes. So there's a lot of considerations when buying a guitar. So you got to find one that fits you right, whether you have a small parlor size guitar or a gigantic jumbo guitar. I love jumbo guitars. That's my personal preference, even though I've got parlor guitars, I got travel size guitars, which are just really shrunk down versions of the fuller size ones. They're easier to carry. They're easier to wrap your hands around. I have a couple little parlor guitars, and they're fantastic guitars. They sound great. I keep one at my office that I play probably a couple times a week. It's made by a company called Bedell, and it's a fantastic guitar. And it's really small. It sits real nice on your lap, especially if you're a smaller person. Get a smaller guitar, especially when you're learning. You know, you don't have to get the biggest, baddest. I mean, unless you're looking for an investment, guitars usually, if you take care of them, they will take care of you and maintain their value. So, disability-wise, you know, find something that you can work your hand around. And then if you have issues like me with limited range of motion with your fingers or complete inability to use it at all, that's a consideration. You know, some people you might even want to use a slide. There's different companies out there. If you have an upper extremity involvement, I know that Bob Radosi at TRS makes a lot of weird, cool things for upper extremity amputees. And one of the things is a drumstick holder, one of them's a guitar pick holder. So Texas Assisted Devices, I believe, may have something as well. For someone who may not be an amputee, they have a system. It's basically like a wrist splint that you can almost be like Inspector Gadget and put a lot of different attachments. I mean, from forks and knives to a guitar pick holder. So there are a lot of opportunities out there for folks who would like to explore music. I mean, if you're familiar with the Def Leppard rock and roll band story, I mean, dude plays in a superstar rock and roll band with one arm. So where there's a will, there's a way. In my world, Stephen Hawking had a job. You got to be pretty jacked up to be sitting on the sidelines, so I hope you're not. Except for right now, stay home, stay safe, we're in it together, and hopefully we'll see you out in the world before long. Jim Young signing off for OPAF. Love you.